Greetings and welcome back to room 303 in our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in the Calamus section, and in the Calamus section we are now 1/4 of the way through. We're 10 poems in of a 39 total poems section here, and we're working with Are You the New Person Drawn Towards Me? This is a very interesting little poem filled with rhetorical questions that begin with the phrase, do you? And in some ways we're going to see the influence of the Bhagavad Gita, both on Whitman, we've said this, as well as on Henry David Thoreau in our analysis and study of Walden. Now our assumptions are that you've been with us at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, the Talks with Walt folder, and you've been with us from inscriptions all the way through the Calamus poems thus far, When I Heard at Close of Day. Now as we turn to our Nortons, as we love to do when we begin this project, we'll hear that both this poem, as we get ready for it, the Calamus number 12, as it sometimes is referred to, has a more intimate title to a new personal admirer. However, in the 1860 revisions, Whitman made the marginal notation for the whole poem out without fail, but instead he dropped the final 2.5 lines of the 1860 text and then reprinted them in the next edition under this present title. Now, this is an interesting poem. In some ways, like Whoever You Are Holding Me Now in Hand, Whitman will speak directly to the reader. Now, is he speaking to you? Is he speaking to a potential friend lover? We kind of leave that one up to you. But the word you gets used 11 times, you or your, 11 times in this poem. Let's enjoy it. Are you the new person drawn toward me? To begin with, take warning. I am surely far different from what you suppose. Do you suppose you will find in me your ideal? Do you think it's so easy to have me become your lover? Do you think the friendship of me would be unalloyed satisfaction? Do you think I am trusty and faithful? Do you see no further than this facade, this smooth and tolerant manner of me? Do you suppose yourself advancing on real ground toward a real heroic man? Have you no thought, O dreamer, that it may be all Maya, illusion? Now, again, this is one of those little poems that show up in Leaves of Grass that speaks so well to our analysis of the 5 Whitmans, as we have said, and especially Whitman as person and Whitman as poet. Notice that he'll begin with a rhetorical question, are you the new person drawn toward me? Now this idea of being drawn, right, almost like magnets, will take us back to our study of Plato's Symposium, and of course the idea that before one is born the soul is severed in half, and like two magnets always searching for its other half to complete it, the soulmate idea. And of course we talked about this at 3A in our analysis of Shakespeare's Sonnet 116, let me not to the marriage of true minds admit impediments. That is to say, he will ask the question, are you the one that's interested in me, that's drawn towards me? And then he says, to begin with, take warning. So there is a lot to be said of the idea that Leaves of Grass can be read as a prodigious warning. That is to say, be careful. And Whitman the poet is saying, be careful about making too many assumptions, either about me or about my songs. We've heard this already a number of times, right? He says, I am surely far different. And this idea of being different from what one thought or different from the real, we've seen this already in a couple of earlier poems, the idea of, what is reality versus just simply apprehension, right, or appearances. I am surely far different from what you suppose. Notice how the word suppose gets used 3 times. That is to say, you guess at, right? And then he'll ask a series of these rhetorical questions. Do you suppose you will find in me your ideal? Now, of course, this question takes us back to our study of Plato and Republic and the ideal state and all of that kind of thing. The notion that we create ideas in our mind of who people are, and then we somehow are upset when they don't live up to them. And I think Whitman was acutely aware of the potentiality of that, and he didn't want to deal with it. Do you think It is so easy to have me become your lover. It's an interesting line. It's an interesting rhetorical question. In other words, there's a whole lot of complicatedness here, he says, in me, and to that degree, it's not so easy for me to just simply become your lover or your friend. As we have said, the word lover for Whitman may be equated as much with friendship as it is with some kind of sexual love. It may be a more Platonic understanding of being a lover. Do you think the friendship of me would be unalloyed satisfaction? And notice unalloyed is an elided verb, as we have seen him trying to capture that American diction. In other words, do you think that it's so easy for you to be my friend and for us both to be satisfied? Do you think I am trusty and faithful? Now, it's an interesting rhetorical question because it almost seems as if he's playing the game of saying that he's not trusting and not faithful. And it's not necessarily so easy to read these lines that way. It may just simply be that, how do you know people so well? Of course, you'll remember that Duncan will say in Macbeth 1:4, there is no art to find the mind's construction in the face. In other words, people aren't always what they appear to be. Whitman says, I'm not sure I'm everything that you might think me to be. Do you see no further than this facade? That's the key word, of course, of this poem. It is a fascinating word. For some of you, you'll remember, oh yeah, this was the word that got used in Eidolons, and you're right? And all of the, in Leaves of Grass, anytime this word facade will get used again, it's always going to be discussing the facade or the structure of physical places and physical buildings. Here, he uses it as a spiritual understanding. The facade is that which kind of keeps us here, of course, in our Big Five. This is that whole study of the psychology as it relates to the sociology. People are not always what they appear to be. He says, can you see no further than this facade, this smooth, he says of himself, and tolerant manner of me. In other words, Whitman puts up, he says, I put up with a lot. That doesn't necessarily mean, though, that I am easily a tolerant individual as it relates to the way people have treated me. Or am I? Right? Notice, all of these are rhetorical questions. The reality may be, he may be all of those things, but how do you know, is his point. Do you suppose, back to that use of that word, do you suppose yourself advancing on real ground toward a real heroic man? This idea of what makes a hero, what makes the artist heroic, and Whitman was already beginning to deal with in his life as a poet this kind of idea that people had made up their mind about him. He has this famous exchange with Ralph Waldo Emerson, where Emerson counsels him away from many of the poems in the Children of Adam and the Calamus section. That is to say, Whitman maybe would have told Emerson, I'm not necessarily everything you suppose me or assume me to be. That is to say, what is authentic? What is real? How so easily can you figure that out, right? And then finally, have you no thought? And then, of course, the use of, oh, dreamer. Okay, it's a fascinating way to speak of it. That it may be all Maya. That is to say, illusions. By the way, the word Maya is only used this one time in all of Leaves of Grass. And the word illusion, other than a riddle song, is not used very often either in Leaves of Grass, which is fascinating to think about. Well, what are we actually dealing with here? Well, it's almost as if Whitman's producing a challenge to us as readers and obviously to would-be friends. The artist, he will argue, is never fully understood. That's what makes the artist so amazing. And to be, of course, the repetition of these 11 you or yours and this do you that's used 6 times in the poem, the repetitions are interesting. They become almost like a mantra of a kind, right? At 3a, well, we mentioned that idea of Maya as it relates to the Bhagavad Gita. As we said in our lectures on Thoreau, he takes the Gita with him to Walden Pond, and it's clear that Whitman himself, in the use of this word, was also interested in that idea that everything is perceived as kind of illusion or Maya. It's not all real, the things that we think are real. And obviously here we have to write down Republic 7 and obviously the cave allegory, the idea that chained prisoners in a cave are looking at shadows on a wall assuming them to be real. But I want to read this poem as it relates to the contemporary of Whitman, Emily Dickinson, who we have such great love and respect for in 303. Do you remember that poem that we dealt with This is my letter to the world that never wrote to me. Judge tenderly of me is the last set of lines there. And I think that's what's really standing behind this poem as well. Whitman wants to be understood, but he wants to be understood on his own terms, right? Finally, at 3b, how are you going to own a poem like this? What about authenticity? Do you think it matters? Do you think it's important to show people everything of who you are, right? And then finally, do you think that the world is actually only Maya or illusion, or are there some things that you feel confident qualifying as real? Well, I'll leave it up to you. One more of these brilliant little poems from the Calamus section. Thank you.